Judging by my apparent penchant for watching anime with chibi characters exploring fantastical worlds, it was probably only a matter of time before I got around to watching Hakumei to Mikochi. As of this writing, less than 20,000 people have it on their list on Mal, so this apparent niche appeal seemed like the perfect bait for a hipster contrarian edgelord like me to watch and hopefully swoon about. And it was alright, but what I found that stuck out the most to me was the show's visual direction, most notably the show's use of paneling. Apparently the director of this show, Masami Ando, has made a bit of a name for himself with this technique, with his most notable example being last winter's No Automata show, Kuzuno Honkai. Well, my first exposure to Masami Ando was through Gakugurashi, not Kuzuno Honkai, so this whole paneling thing is pretty new to me. Anime is no stranger to the good old split screen. It's used very often, most frequently for reaction shots, to the point that it's become somewhat of a trope of the medium. However, the paneling that I'm speaking of which is not exactly that. While it is still a non-diegetic aspect ratio change, it is mostly relegated to being within a few panels where things are actually animated. Sometimes the panels are overlaid on top of other fully colored backgrounds with other things happening inside of them. Sometimes they cause everything else on screen to blur out to draw focus onto them, and sometimes they're just on top of random backgrounds. Ando clearly seems to be doing this on purpose, for he is leveraging several of the advantages of such an unorthodox visual presentation. These advantages go as follows. First, this technique is definitely very economical. When a studio only has to fully color in parts of a frame for a sizable portion of the show, a lot of labor and time is saved, allowing for the team to have more time to make the rest of the show look good. And this seems to have panned out. As far as I can tell, Hakumei to Mikochi is pretty visually pleasant, and Kuzuno Honkai also looks pretty good, though no Automata shows usually do. Second, it allows for something on screen to be constantly in motion. People have long complained about the nature of TV anime when it is static, with much emphasis being placed on how it's just barely synchronized lips flapping away for minutes on end. The more contained nature of this paneling technique keeps the eye busier by making it dart across the display to process the varied placement of the things on screen. In fact, if you haven't noticed, I actually use this trick quite a lot in my own editing, for I prefer to put a still image over a moving one to maintain movement on screen and hopefully keep the video a bit more visually stimulating. Third and finally, it gives the director more control over what the viewer sees. This is probably the biggest advantage of this technique because of just how much this allows a director to do. This could allow a director to withhold information for the sake of a dramatic reveal, or also allow a director to portray situations that would be visually impossible for a single perspective shot. To digress from Hakumei to Mikochi for a bit, one of the best examples of a director utilizing the advantages of a non-diegetic split screen is this gag from Lucky Star where Kagami and Tsukasa's vacation activities are displayed side by side. This gag is literally impossible to show in any other way, and while it is more of a muscle flex from Kyoto Animation than a cost-effective measure of visual presentation from Lerche, this shows you how empowering this technique is. And that's where my issues with its usage in Hakumei to Mikochi begin. Of the three things that I listed as advantages to using this paneling technique, only the second and third of them actually play towards the direct benefit of the audience. I'm sure that you could argue that making the show cheaper to produce makes the rest of the show look better, and I guess that plays towards the benefit of the audience, but I'm talking strictly direct benefit. The issue with its usage in Hakumei to Mikochi is that it only really makes use of the first two advantages of the technique. Too much of the time, the panels convey just as much information as any conventionally directed scene would. Don't get me wrong, there are some pretty okay usages of this technique throughout the 2 episodes of the show that I watched, and I'm sure that there will be more and better examples later on in the show, but the hit-to-miss ratio of these attempts was simply a bit too high to the point that I actually started to get bothered by it. Now, I'm sure you probably just think I'm nitpicking, and I guess I am, but to demonstrate how this technique can be used well, I'd like to refer to a film that is about as much of a far cry from Hakumei to Mikochi as possible. Hiroyuki Imaishi's Dead Leaves. Imaishi's key animations often are low in frame rate, instead placing emphasis on the punchiness of the cut over its fluidity. That is to say, he focuses on picking out the most important and impactful frames to draw instead of going the traditional route of animating on ones to look impressive. Needless to say, from a cursory glance across his work on Gurren Lagann, Kill la Kill, Panty and Stocking with Garter Belt, Inferno Cop, and of course Space Patrol Luluko, it is obvious that Imaishi is no stranger to limited animation. That is not to say that Dead Leaves is anywhere near limited in its animation, but his knowledge of these principles is still evident through how he uses split screen in this film. Sure, they aren't exactly the same as Masami Ando's panels, but they still demonstrate the same idea. To compensate for the limited animation of the project that he works on, Imaishi's shows tend to have as much movement happening on screen as possible. However, that does not mean that these shows just throw stuff at the viewer without any rhyme or reason. Rather, Imaishi strings these quick bursts of motion into coherent narratives of movement, creating a sense of visual flow. In the exceedingly graphic and over-the-top action scenes of Dead Leaves, Imaishi applies these principles of visual flow to the technique of split screens to create a fight scene that is both chaotic yet still easily understood. Take this gunfight in the middle of this random corridor, for instance. When Retro, the TV headman, runs up and smashes this cop in the head with his head, a split screen on both sides of this action pops up, with a cop occupying each of these two new screens. The positions of these split screens changes the aspect ratio of the frame occupied by Retro, denoting a sense of being cornered, because visually Retro just lost a bunch of real estate on the screen. This also clues us as the audience into the fact that these cops are standing on either side of him, which allows this shot to transition seamlessly into the next where the two cops simultaneously raise their guns to shoot Retro. This shot is followed by a couple of pretty epic impact frames before it is revealed that the two cops had missed and actually shot each other. Then, 3 new split screens of guns as they fly upward after being dropped by their previous owners flash onto the screen one by one. Now you might be thinking, why are there 3 guns? The previous shot only showed the 2 cops shooting each other. Where did the third gun come from? Well, the third gun is actually from the first cop that Retro head smashed, and that kicked off this sequence. Imaishi has accounted for the beginning of the action into the end of the action. This is visual flow. All the while, the positioning of the split screens easily communicates to the viewer which gun belonged to which cop, thus maintaining a good sense of orientation in regards to all of the other elements in the scene. This then flows into Retro mowing down a huge line of cops with his newly acquired weapons. Now imagine all of this information from the scene being conveyed without the usage of split screen, and then you'll start to see the true potential of such a technique. Now I know that Hakumei to Mikochi is about as different a type of show that you can possibly get, but just because it doesn't have any fight scenes in it doesn't mean it can't still use paneling to its maximum potential. The entire exchange that I broke down from Dead Leaves is only about 10 seconds long, yet it is able to convey the position and orientation of Retro in respect to the 3 cops, the actual sequence of events in this skirmish, and sets up for the next action set piece by arming Retro with 3 guns, which he will now use to do some more violence. Compare this to this shot from Hakumei to Mikochi, where a panel is utilized to show Hakumei turning her head to speak to Mikochi. What is conveyed here? Anything new? At all? We already knew their position to each other because the previous shot had already conveyed that. There isn't really any sequence of events being shown either. This shot could just as easily have been done without paneling at all. The only thing that this panel actually does provide is a close-up of the side of Hakumei's face. This easily could have been set up for some kind of subtle facial expression or character acting that could clue us into what Hakumei is thinking, but it isn't. It's just any typical mouth flap shot that's followed by an equally uninteresting mouth flap shot, which has now reduced this conversation to a shot reverse shot. Well, I guess it isn't the most fair comparison of scenes, but you get the idea. Plus, I guess comparing the god of visual flow himself to just about anyone could make the other party look much worse. All I'm saying is, when I saw such a powerful and useful directorial trick go underutilized, the sense of sadness at the lost potential that overcame me was palpable. Granted, I've only seen 2 episodes of the show, and the only other show from Masami Ando that I've seen is Gakugarashi, which, if I remember correctly, doesn't really utilize paneling at all. Thus, I do not know if it gets markedly better later in the series, or if it's just way better in Kuzuno Honkai. Anyway, that's all I had to say about this topic for now. I'm really sorry about the uploads lately. And anyway, I'm back from hiatus, so hopefully I'll be making videos more consistently again. This past month has been hectic and exhausting. This time, I'm not going to make any promises about when the next video will come out, but I appreciate you guys for sticking with me even though I haven't been consistently putting out content. For more of my thoughts on shows in general, but not in the form of fully scripted and edited videos, go follow me on Twitter. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed the video and that you have a nice day.